Movement across a landscape often looks like a matter of choice. Routes appear open. Borders shift. Settlements expand. Trade grows. Yet many of the decisions that later seem deliberate were already narrowed by terrain long before anyone recognized the constraint. Geography rarely prohibits action outright. Its influence is quieter than that. It changes the cost of movement, the speed of communication, the reliability of supply, and the distance between intention and result. Over time, these small adjustments accumulate until entire systems begin operating inside limits they did not consciously design. What appears to be power often emerges from geography temporarily cooperating. What appears to be freedom of action often exists only within channels that terrain established long before any institution, market, or state arrived to use them. Historically, some of the most important constraints did not emerge from opposition or conflict. They emerged from the physical structure of the world itself. Across continents, geography creates uneven possibilities. Rivers concentrate movement. Mountain ranges redirect it. Deserts interrupt it. Coastlines connect distant regions while isolating inland ones. Natural harbors become points of accumulation. Narrow passages become bottlenecks through which goods, people, and information repeatedly pass. Climate introduces its own boundaries. Seasonal rains alter routes. Winter closes corridors. Wind patterns determine the reliability of maritime travel. Distance remains present even when technology attempts to reduce it. A map often appears static, but the pressures contained within it are constantly active. The terrain does not negotiate. It simply presents conditions within which movement must occur. The effect becomes clearer when viewed at the scale of logistics rather than politics. A river may appear as a simple geographic feature, yet it can function as a transportation network, a supply corridor, and a communication route simultaneously. Settlements emerge near it not because of preference alone, but because movement becomes easier there than elsewhere. Roads often follow paths already suggested by terrain. Trade routes rarely move randomly across a landscape. They concentrate through valleys, along coastlines, and across the few crossings where natural barriers can be overcome efficiently. As these patterns repeat, infrastructure accumulates around them. Warehouses appear near ports. Markets emerge at crossroads. Population gathers where movement is cheapest. The structure begins reinforcing itself. Future decisions increasingly depend on earlier concentrations. Alternative routes may remain technically possible, but they become progressively less practical as investment, labor, and coordination continue flowing through established corridors. Distance then introduces another layer of pressure. A shipment traveling 100 miles and a shipment traveling 1,000 miles do not simply differ in length. They differ in uncertainty. Weather has more opportunities to intervene. Delays accumulate. Information arrives later. Small disruptions become harder to predict. Settlements separated by great distances often spend significant effort compensating for conditions they cannot directly observe. Seasonal variation frequently converts geography into time. Distance converted seasonal wind variation into weeks of uncertainty for settlements awaiting grain shipments. Cargo that departed on schedule might still arrive late because the environment altered movement after departure. The route remained open. The system remained functional, yet predictability narrowed. Over longer periods, repeated adaptation creates structural habits. Traders learn which corridors remain reliable. Communities organize labor around transportation schedules. Storage facilities expand where delays occur frequently. Geography does not force identical outcomes, but it repeatedly rewards similar responses. As generations accumulate infrastructure around those responses, flexibility begins to diminish. A coastal route that initially offered efficiency may eventually become indispensable. A mountain pass that once served regional exchange may become essential to wider networks. The more successful a route becomes, the more activity depends upon its continued operation. Constraint grows through concentration rather than prohibition. This pattern appears again when systems scale. Local geography may be manageable. Regional geography becomes more demanding. Continental geography introduces pressures that accumulate across multiple environments simultaneously. Rivers connect some regions while separating others. Mountain chains create natural compartments. Climate zones produce uneven agricultural output. Resources emerge in locations unrelated to where they are needed. The result is coordination across distance. Yet coordination itself depends on movement. Grain must travel. Timber must move. Metals must reach workshops. Information must arrive before conditions change. Every additional mile introduces friction. Every transfer point creates another opportunity for delay. Workers loading cargo at a river port often adjusted schedules around water levels rather than administrative plans. The structure dictated timing. Human activity adapted afterward. Over time, infrastructure attempts to reduce these limitations. Roads improve, ports expand, storage capacity increases, communication accelerates. Yet infrastructure rarely eliminates geography. More often, it reveals which constraints matter most. Faster transportation can increase dependence on particular corridors. Larger networks can make bottlenecks more important rather than less. Efficiency often concentrates activity into fewer routes, making disruption more consequential when it occurs. The pressure remains subtle because success frequently disguises it. A route functioning smoothly attracts additional use. A port handling increasing volumes receives more investment. A corridor supporting growth becomes central to the wider system. Stability encourages concentration. Concentration increases exposure. At smaller scales, adaptation continues quietly. Traders reroute cargo when seasonal conditions shift. Farmers adjust planting schedules around transportation reliability. Settlements expand storage when delivery timing becomes uncertain. These responses appear local, yet together they reveal a broader pattern. Structure is continuously shaping behavior before deliberate strategy enters the picture. Eventually, the accumulated pattern becomes visible. Not because geography changes, but because the system encounters the outer boundary of what existing arrangements can absorb. Delays begin appearing across multiple locations simultaneously. Bottlenecks persist longer than expected. Infrastructure designed to manage pressure becomes part of the pressure itself. Recognition arrives, yet recognition does not create escape. Knowing that a corridor is essential does not create another corridor. Understanding the importance of a river does not relocate it. Identifying a bottleneck does not immediately remove it. The choices available at that moment were largely established by decades or centuries of accumulated movement. A question begins to emerge. At what point does adaptation stop expanding possibility and start binding a system more tightly to the geography it was designed to overcome? The landscape remains unchanged. Rivers continue flowing through the same valleys. Coastlines continue shaping movement. Mountains continue separating regions. The pressure persists, not because anyone sustains it, but because the physical conditions that produced it remain present. Infrastructure continues operating. Routes remain active. Cargo still moves. Settlements still adjust. From a distance, the system appears stable. Movement continues. Exchange continues. Expansion may even continue. Yet beneath that motion, geography remains quietly converting distance into delay, concentration into vulnerability, and efficiency into dependence. The process rarely announces itself. It accumulates gradually through countless ordinary adjustments. And so the final image is not one of failure, but of continuation. Ships still depart. Roads still carry traffic. Markets still function. The structure remains active. What changes is the narrowing space between what the system wants to do and what the landscape allows. Geography does not need to stop movement to limit power. It only needs to shape the paths through which movement must pass. Long after plans change and institutions evolve, those paths remain, quietly defining the boundaries within which history continues to move. If this story gave you something to think about, consider subscribing to Timeless Questions. We explore history, philosophy, and the patterns that quietly guide human behavior.